global healthcare industry. Welcome, Nisa. Good to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Gucho, for inviting me. It's great to be here.
So since the launch of the new listing regime for Chapter 18A, many of your portfolio companies have been successfully listed in Hong Kong. Looking back, what has the listing regime reform, how has it impacted the new economy investment environment?
You know, it's very interesting. I can't believe it's been 4 years. You know, these are very important 4 years for biotech industry in China. The 18A regime has taken a very pioneering leadership in really allowing pre-revenue companies to list here. And since then, the Star Board, ChiNext, and other exchanges in China have taken on and started allowing pre-revenue companies to list as well. So this really allows many biotech companies and healthcare companies to flourish and raised you know, a tremendous amount of money to do their R&D and as well as you know, expanding globally. So you know, we ourselves, we've had 33 IPOs since the early 2020s, and 25 of which were in healthcare. So we've had you know, IPOs in Star Board, ChiNext, Hong Kong Exchange, and so on and so forth. And it's really great to see that you know, because of the HKEX 18A regime, we've seen companies from you know, early stage drug discovery companies, medical devices, vaccine companies, diagnostic, healthcare services, health tech companies. They all raised you know, quite a bit of money and really blossoming and pushing their R&D. And not only that, there are a lot of global investors who are now really interested in China healthcare as a result. And there's also a lot of, it's a lot easier to recruit as well. I would say that 10 years ago, it's very, very difficult to recruit from big pharma. Now, it's a lot easier. A lot of folks actually, you know, be it C-level or senior executives from big pharma, after 5 years, 10 years, they would actually want to jump ship and join a startup because of the opportunity to make a lot more money. So, and then also really make a difference. So I think this is a really, really good, you know, great transformation that we've seen. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Thank you. I would also like to ask you as well, so where do these reforms fit into the HKEX long-term strategy for the new economy sector? What's next in taking the biotech and healthcare listing franchise to the next level? A lot of our company CEOs and you know, issuers and investors are interested, and they want me to ask you that question.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, let me try to include that in the context of the listing reforms that we did in 2018, whereby it radically transformed the DNA of our markets. Essentially, we had over 200 companies that listed since the regime was implemented, and about 100 of these companies were actually healthcare companies. In total, they raised approximately close to $900 billion during this period. So a remarkable achievement. And then when we look at how that compares vis-a-vis the whole market, it was about 2/3 of all the publicly offered securities were new economy companies. This is a great thing for our markets. And when we look at the percentage of trading that it represents of our market, that's about 1/3 of the trading volume of our markets today. And we're also excited about the future, about what's coming, because we have about 180 companies that are actually on the pipeline to be listed. And of this, we have about 35 that are actually healthcare. So very exciting about the pharmaceutical sector. We're excited about the diversity that we're having. Originally, most of the companies were just traditional healthcare companies, top 10. They were all traditional healthcare companies. When we look at today, there's 4 that are biotech, and there's 2 that are digital healthcare companies. So the shape has been changing quite a bit. So that's also very exciting. Now, we continue to implement reforms. There are lots of things that we're doing in terms of making sure that what we did for 18A, we can also translate into what we call the specialized sector market. There's been a lot of demand for this. Companies with levels of revenue that would not allow it to list on our main market, but they may have the possibility of growing a lot, or they are large scale. We're also considering to create some bespoke chapter for them. And we also want to continue expanding the type of companies that are listing in our markets. I mean, different type of healthcare sector, whether it's diagnostics, health tech, digital healthcare, the whole supply chain of the healthcare sector. Those are areas that we're trying to support. And with the help also of the policy support that we have in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government, for example, has allocated 10 billion Hong Kong dollars to support the industry. And there's also a lot of investments in R&D in local universities and research institutes. So we're quite excited about the future. So Nisa, let me go back to you. So lots of great things have been happening, but the capital market is experiencing a little bit of turbulence lately. And the question is, how are healthcare companies planning their financing strategy, especially as we gradually move out of the COVID shadow? What do they need to support the next stage of growth?
Yeah, this is a question that we've been asked by a lot of our investors and public investors and whatnot lately. You know, it's been interesting because in the last 12 months, XBI has decreased by 50%. And now it's coming back up again. But globally, all the biotech healthcare sector has come down. And it's really because, you know, because of COVID, the last 2 years, the ramp up of the valuations of global healthcare companies have gone up so much that, and there were also a lot of retail investors, you know, stuck at home. So they started trading a lot, and now, you know, folks are going back and working and whatnot. So we're starting to see, you know, quite a bit of adjustments in the last 12 months. But what's really interesting is on the private sector, you know, the first half of 2022, the private sector, they've raised $43 billion US for, you know, healthcare, and it's down 43%. In China, healthcare investment is 10 billion, and it's down 40% since last year. But what's really interesting is the number of deals has actually increased by 13%. So we believe what this means is a lot more people are investing in early stage, and you know, investing in you know, seed round, Series A round, pre-Series A round, or whatever you call it, and less so on pre-IPO rounds, which were much more prevalent a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years ago. So, but what's really interesting also is U.S. had done 670 private deals in the first half of this year, and China did 630. So there are actually a nice supply of companies that are going to be maturing, if you see it that way, in 3, 5, 7 years, that could potentially be listing in Hong Kong or Starboard or Chinext. So we see a lot of innovation coming out from China, despite of the volatility in the public market. Folks who have raised a lot of money, they're really going back to fundamentals, laser sharp fundamental, really focusing on, you know, the pipeline and really putting money into differentiating assets that can actually take them to the next milestone, so that they can be recognized and valued by the public investors and for private investors if they were going to raise a last round. So there are, you know, a lot of companies also doing cost cutting all around, you know, in China, in US and whatnot. But, you know, 60% of our private portfolio have actually raised a round in the last 12 months. I would say that 18 months ago, we started telling them, you know, let's try to raise some money, because in the next 18, 24 months, it's going to be very, very hard. You know, who knows with the economic downturn, with, you know, war ongoing and so on and so forth, if inflation. So we're very fortunate that 60-some% of our portfolio companies have raised money. And so, you know, and everybody's focused on fundamentals. And I can say that the Chinese healthcare companies, as well as some of these Southeast Asian healthcare companies, as we're seeing, they're very strong fundamentals. The companies that have revenue actually have a very nice uptick of revenue even in the last 12 months, even with some lockdown in China and so forth. So I'm very positive about this sector, and I do believe that when the IPO windows opens again, we're going to see a very, very good quality companies coming out. Yeah.
Yep.
So on that, I do want to ask you though, because a lot of people are asking, and I think, especially companies to say, okay, so when are the IPO windows going to be opening up? And in an increasingly complex economic and geopolitical environment, what are the opportunities and risks facing the global healthcare sector? But I think most importantly is they want to know what role does HKEX play in supporting the China healthcare companies that want to internationalize?
Right. Thank you, Nisa. And it tags along into a lot of the things that you actually said. The environment is very difficult, but the opportunity presented by the China healthcare is also incredibly attractive. There are a lot of indicators in China, a population that is aging, the middle class that is like growing. There's a lot more focus after what happened in COVID. So the outlook for the Chinese capital markets around healthcare seem to be very attractive. That sector has been growing definitely double digits over the last few years, actually, according to some reports, closer to 30 to 40% per year. So very, very significant growth. Now, how do we confront that with the side that we're seeing more and more challenges from a geopolitical point of view? Well, I mean, what we want to make sure is that we continue connecting East and West, that we can be a place where we can create sufficient critical mass by companies that want to raise capital here and investors that want to come here, that we make it really easy for international pharma companies to say, this is my venue of choice. Of course, by doing that, we also attract research, we attract universities to focus on the sector, and different international institutes that want to set up a base here. So our hope is that, first of all, we continue enhancing our ecosystem through issuance of ETFs, issuance of a diversity of products that are aimed at enhancing the ecosystem for global investors. And we also attract a new set of clients that have not typically invested in this part of the world, saying, healthcare is an interesting place, I'm going to invest in Hong Kong. So that's what we're trying to do. But going back to you as a top global investor, you have witnessed different development phases of healthcare in China and the US. Which phase do you think that we are in now?
It's interesting. I think, I've been involved with China healthcare since 2002, so it's 20 years. And I still remember when I moved back from US to China to start a company because a distant uncle had liver cancer in China, and we were looking all over for good therapeutics, but there weren't any, so I decided to quit my job in US and start a company bringing in cancer treatment for cancer patients in China. And I still remember back then, the 5-year survival rate for cancer in US was 66%. And in China, it was 24%. And, we have since grown to, I think the 5-year survival rate in some of the big cities are around 40-some%. So we still have a long way to go. But what's really interesting is when I came back, the largest medical equipment conference called CMEF, which is still being held right now every year. But at that time, 100% of the company exhibited were black and white ultrasound machines and patient monitoring system. And now, 20 years later, every single product that you can imagine that are available in US are being displayed in CMEF, and they're developed and manufactured in China. So all the way to a pacemaker, which typically is probably one of the most difficult devices to be found. And what's really interesting also is in the last 10, 15 years, China has transformed from simply a CRO state offering services to now more and more innovation. Now, in the meantime, US in the last U.S. has actually enjoyed a long cycle, a 10-year cycle of blossoming of the healthcare sector. In fact, when I was talking to some of the more senior bankers who have been around for a long, long time, they said that, in the past, even though U.S. biotech sector has been growing in the last 30-some years, there's every cycle lasts about 3 to 5 years, but this cycle is the longest ever. It was 10 years. And so it makes a lot of sense to have this adjustment. But during these 10 years, U.S. has also saw a significant number of new developments, be it DNA, gene sequencing, gene editing, a lot of new modalities, mRNA, you talked about ADC, siRNA, cell therapy, gene therapy, and so forth. So, but what's really interesting also, and also the convergence of healthcare and technology. So while China in the last 15 years went from, really nothing, and mind you, I think at that time, India was ahead of China in a big, big way. And so, in the last 15 years, how, with all the talents in China, really focusing on finding the Medtronics and the Genentechs and the Pfizers, because a lot of these products are not even available at the time in China. And now, making them available. And still, I think at this time, we're still trying to, work on a lot of low-hanging fruits. Some of the companies that went public within our portfolio, including a leading dental chain company, one of the leading cardiovascular company, electronic medical records company. This type of sectors, they're already very available and very large companies in U.S. So I think China still has quite a bit of room to grow when it comes to filling up the gap for the different subsectors. And in the meantime, with all the very exciting new modalities and new technology that's happening in U.S., there are also a lot of talents that are doing the same in China in parallel. So, so that pairing with the new technology and then also the convergence of healthcare and technology, this makes the whole healthcare sector a very, very busy sector. And then so I think in the last 2 years, we've also seen the private valuations gone up a lot because a lot of the TMT funds also felt that, hey, this is a great sector to come in. We saw a lot of crossover funds coming in, a lot of hedge funds, and naturally a lot of international funds as well. But, just like a lot of the cycles that we've seen in the last 20 years, some of the hot money has gone away, and, in the last year or so. And so it's easier actually for healthcare investors like ourselves to be able to do a little bit more longer due diligence in companies and then really working closely with our portfolio companies. We spend probably 50% of our time working with our portfolio companies and really help beef up their, making sure that they reach the milestones. And really, this is actually a very good time to hire great executives into the teams as well. And so on and so forth. So, so I do think that, and I think what's really interesting is in the last year, surprisingly, but there is some innovation coming out from, China in the sense that there were 15 deals that were out-licensing deals, Chinese innovative drugs out-licensed to either US or European big pharma. And the median amount deal size is actually 900 million US. So that's actually very, very good direction. We've also had, when I had a one-on-one meeting with the global CEO of Medtronic a couple of years ago, he also mentioned that there are a couple of companies in our portfolio that they're really interested to either invest or acquire. So I do think that, we are touching a little bit of the tip of the iceberg. This is the right direction. I would say that most of the companies are still not there yet, but hopefully in 5 to 7 years' time, there's going to be more and more innovation coming out from China. And but I think the key is that we would love to see more and more collaboration, Chinese and U.S. and European and Japanese, pharma companies really coming together to develop affordable drugs, affordable devices for all the patients globally. And I think that's where HKEX is playing a great role in allowing these companies raise quite a bit of money to expand overseas. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let me just follow up with one quick question. Chinese healthcare companies have been growing very rapidly, and COVID actually, accelerated some of this innovation as well. So, what are the key drivers of this growth that we're seeing?
I think that what's really interesting is, incidentally, about 100 of our portfolio companies were involved frontline, either in Wuhan or in the last 2 years with COVID, be it on the vaccine side or testing or drug development, and so on and so forth. But what's really interesting is now all of a sudden people are saying, I think even 10 years ago, people were talking about, or 15 years ago, people were saying, oh, there was the internet boom. The next 10 years is going to be the biotech boom. We've been waiting 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and maybe now we're actually starting to see that. There's so much development when it comes to the fundamental technology, the basic research that was done in the last 20 years, they're all of a sudden beginning to come service out, and people are willing to pay and advance the adaptability of these technology. mRNA is a very great example because of the success of Moderna and Biotech. I think we're also seeing a lot of new modalities being funded, and I would say that even 7-8 years ago, the only people who were funding drug discovery in China were property developers or folks in the traditional industry. They're like, I got some extra money, I'll just put some money in. But now actually a lot of sophisticated folks are coming in and putting money in, and not only that, a lot of talents are willing to come in. So so this is great, but most of all, I would say that the ease of fundraising makes it a lot easier for companies to be able to raise money and move to that next level. So I do think that the last 4 years of the 18A is really, we're very, very fortunate to see how the Hong Kong X regime has really helped, accelerate a lot of the growth in the sector. So in that, I do want to also ask you though, what are the key strategies for Hong Kong X in maintaining and strengthening Hong Kong's position as a leading global healthcare fundraising hub? And what does the future look like? Because we all want to know.
Yeah, great. So I mean, it's consistent with our overall strategy that I would say we need to focus on key things. Number one is leverage our China strength. So what we're saying is, connecting China and the world. So to make sure that we really use that China advantage of understanding, knowing the issuers, the investors that have an interest in that, and some specific things that we want to do. We want to enhance the Connect program. So one of the things that we have done is we enhance the 18A chapter so that companies that are part of the 18A chapter can be part of Stock Connect and qualify for Stock Connect. So that's just one example. But we also want to make sure that there's sufficient amount of risk management products for people to hedge their exposure and manage it. So we've for example, now are able to trade 850 internationally. That's the futures market for A shares. But we're also trying to do more and more things in the derivatives market. So making sure that we have that connectivity is good. Number three, we're trying to facilitate issuers that want to list in our markets. And number four, we're constantly thinking about how we can add new products. So all these things are going to enhance our connectivity between East and West and leverage that to make sure that then we can create our number two objective, which is connecting capital with the opportunities, which comes around creating a vibrant ecosystem, having liquidity in our market. One of the challenges is when you're building a market, liquidity sometimes is a little hard to come. So we need to make sure that we improve the microstructure situation of our market to make it a market that is easy to trade. So that's the number two. And the number three is we're going to, we call it Connect Today with Tomorrow, which is essentially adding new products, whether it may be carbon markets or digital assets or leveraging our data, all of those things to support the issuers and investors that come to our market. So with all that, Nisa, thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to have you. Biotech and healthcare is obviously a very exciting space, and it has been great to hear your insights and to discuss the challenges and opportunities with you. I hope everyone viewing found our conversation interesting and useful. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you, Mr. Agazine and Ms. Lang. In the next section, we are delighted to be joined by Professor Ugur Sahin, the CEO of Biotech. Professor Ugur Sahin is one of the world's foremost experts on mRNA medicines, and on a day-to-day basis, he leads Biotech's research and development of mRNA